Hello, and welcome to Coding for FTC. Today, we're going to cover the introductions of coding for FTC. We're going to go over hardware parts you need to know before coding and learn about some coding terminology. You may have heard of op modes before, and this is where we're going to cover what op modes are. Then we're going to look at some example codes, and then finally, things to be aware about when coding. This is a simplified drawing of how a robot works. On our robot, there's a robot controller, and this robot controller is connected to the driver station by Wi-Fi. And our driver station is connected to two gamepads, and these gamepads are used to drive our robot during the match. So the inputs in the gamepad are transferred to the driver station, and the driver station transmits the signals to the robot controller, and the robot controller makes the robot move. This is how our robot controller looks like. There are two versions of this, with one as expansion hub and one as the control hub. The first version, using the expansion hub, has two parts that control the whole process. The first one is the Android robot controller, shown here, and this is just an Android phone. This Android phone is connected to the expansion hub with wires, and this expansion hub has all sorts of other devices connected to it, such as the battery or the motors or the servos or the sensors. Here you can see our driver station interface. You can see many different information about the robot here. The left-hand corner is the name of the device, and below it there's the battery power of this phone. This is pretty important when you get to competitions. This is the robot configuration and the battery power of RC phone. These two buttons right here, the triangle ones, are pretty important. The left one is for the autonomous op mode, and the right one is for the teleop mode. When you click on these buttons, you can see a list from which you can choose of the op modes. The centerpiece right here is probably the most important one. This changes from init to a big play symbol to a stop symbol. And this is where the bottom part is where all telemetry data are sent from the robot. Our telemetry data sent from the robot is displayed. And the title here, you can see the op mode selected. So what is the op mode that we're all talking about? To know that, we have to get familiar with some terminology. So first, classes in Java is all code that is grouped together. Basically in Java, all the groups together, all code is grouped together in classes. We'll discuss exactly what classes are later, but for now just know that a class is a group of code, and each class has its name, and that name is used for the file name with the .java extension at the end. Next, method is a group of code that is within a class, and methods are the smallest executable function, and so methods make up a class, basically. You can think of this as just a quick function. Packages are directories, and this is where the code is located. Files in the same packages have special privileges with each other, and packages can have a package within it. So an op mode is a program for our robot, and we can have multiple op modes, and they are all stored in the teamcode package. Op mode is what basically tells our robot to run. When an op mode is selected, because we can have multiple op modes, it first runs through the init part of the program. We can also run init loop part of the program, which runs 50 times a second before start is pressed, but after init is pressed. When the start is pressed on the DS or the driver station, the op mode goes to the next step, which is start. And after it runs start, it also runs through loop, which runs 50 times a second. When stop is pressed, it executes the stop function, and once all of this is run, it goes back to the op mode selection mode. And in this diagram, you can see that there are dashed lines and full lines. So these are just necessary for the program to run, while these init loop or start or stop programs are not necessary. Here's an example code. The first and second and the third lines, if you're using Android Studio, you won't have to enter any of these lines. It will automatically add them for you, but it's still pretty important to know what these mean. The first line just tells you where your file is located. So org.firstinspires.ftc.teamcode is where this whole file is located. The second and third lines are telling your code to bring in code from FTC SDK, Software Development Kit, so that we can use them. The third line, at teleop, is a pretty critical part of the code. This line tells you to add this op mode into the teleop section of your driver station. If you use the @autonomous annotation, you would see this code in the autonomous dropdown of your driver station. There's also @disabled annotation, and if you have that, then your code will compile, but it won't be shown in the list of op modes. The disabled annotation is pretty important and useful also when you start testing out your codes, as it lets you just ignore some of the op modes that aren't needed. The public here means that others can see it, and it's required for op modes. The class here means that we're defining a class, and that hello world is the name of the class. Extends op mode means that this class is a child of op mode class, and we'll just talk about this later. @override tells the compiler that we are meaning to override or replace functionality of our parent class. We'll talk more about this also. And public on the second part is the same meaning as the public over here. This means that this method is callable from outside the class. Void doesn't mean void means that this method doesn't return anything. Init is just the name of this method, and inside the curly brackets are just what this method is planning to do. So everything inside the curly brackets will run when this method is called. So telemetry.addData parentheses hello world it sends what it does is it sends data to the driver station, which just lets us debug problems. So in this case we send back hello world, and that will show up in the driver station. The second part, public void loop, is also a critical part of the op modes. You need these two codes when you're writing op mode. The init method and loop method is necessary. Now you've seen an example code. And there are things to be aware when coding. First of all, Java is case sensitive. So a var lowercase var1 is not the same as uppercase var1. Also, contiguous white spaces are collapsed into one white space. So it wouldn't matter if you put two spaces in between the var and the equal sign, or three spaces in between. And block of codes are encapsulated with curly brackets. Parentheses must always be matched. Same with brackets. All statements must end in a semicolon. This is important, and you might forget this very often and be the cause of an error. There are some exceptions though. Semicolons are not used when a code block follows. For example, the class or methods declarations we have seen so far. Semicolons are also ignored in comments, and semicolons are not used after curly braces.